to the old lady who still won't let go of Dad's money. My son raised his wine glass high enough that the light from the chandelier caught the red liquid inside. His words were slightly slurred, but not enough to be dismissed as accidental. There was intention in them, a sharp edge hidden inside what he wanted everyone to believe was humor. A few people laughed. A few didn't. I held my fork still above my slice of birthday cake. 72 years old, and that was the toast my only son chose to give me. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I used to believe birthdays were about gratitude, about celebrating survival, about family gathering close. That night, I learned they can also reveal what people have been thinking all along. The dining room looked beautiful. I made sure of it. The oak table my husband built decades ago shone under the chandelier. I had taken out the good china with a thin blue trim, cloth napkins, real silver, fresh flowers in the center, white lilies, Thomas's favorite. Daniel sat 3 seats to my right, his tie loosened, cheeks flushed from too much wine. Melissa sat beside him, back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't laugh at the toast, but she didn't correct him either. My granddaughters stared at their plates, suddenly very interested in their mashed potatoes. "Relax, Mom," Daniel said when the silence stretched a little too long. "It's a joke. A joke." I smiled. I've learned over the years that a calm smile unsettles people more than anger ever could. "I'm not holding on to anything," I said gently. "Your father and I worked hard for what we built." The word we hung between us like a fragile ornament. Daniel waved a dismissive hand. "The house is too big for you. The money's just sitting there. You don't need all of it." Sitting there, as if the mortgage payments had made themselves. As if I hadn't packed Daniel's school lunches at 5 in the morning while working part-time to help keep this house. As if his father and I hadn't refinanced twice during the recession to keep everything afloat. But I didn't say any of that. Melissa leaned forward slightly, her tone smooth. "We're just thinking about what's best for you. Simplifying. Downsizing. Simplifying." 3 months ago, my husband was still alive. He used to sit at the head of this very table, carving the roast with steady hands. He would squeeze my knee under the table when Daniel got too loud. Now his chair sat empty, and our son was raising a glass to my supposed stubbornness. I set my fork down carefully. "I think tonight is about celebrating another year," I said quietly. "Not discussing finances." Daniel laughed again, but softer this time. "You're too sensitive." Sensitive, because I remember hospital bills. Because I remember holding Thomas's hand when the machines around him beeped in uneven rhythms. Because I remember promises. The guests I stood. "Thank you for coming," I said, voice steady. "Please enjoy the cake." No one stopped me as I walked in the kitchen. Behind me, conversation resumed in awkward fragments. I placed my hands on the counter and stared at the dark window above the sink. My reflection looked older than 72. Not fragile, not broken, just aware. From the dining room, I heard Daniel say, "She acts like I'm trying to take something." The refrigerator hummed steadily. The house felt large again. Too large, perhaps, but not empty. When I returned, someone had already blown out the candles for me. My slice of cake was half eaten. Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mom," he said more quietly, "we're just looking out for you." I nodded once. "I'm sure you are." But something had shifted inside me. For months, I told myself their questions were concern, that their suggestions were kindness. That grief was making everyone clumsy with their words. But grief doesn't humiliate. Concern doesn't toast entitlement. By 10:30, the guests were gone. The flowers drooped slightly. A wine stain marked the tablecloth near Daniel's place setting. I folded it anyway. Upstairs, Thomas's study remained untouched. His reading glasses still rested beside his chair. I opened the desk drawer and saw the neatly organized documents, deeds, insurance papers, copies of the trust. Thomas had been careful. So had I. I closed the drawer gently. 72 years old. And tonight, my son toasted me like an obstacle. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply turned off the lights one by one. And for the first time, I understood clearly. They weren't waiting for me to grieve. They were waiting for me to step aside. And I had no intention of doing that. The house felt different the morning after my birthday. Not quieter, just clearer. I woke up at 5:42 a.m., the same way I had for most of my adult life. Thomas used to tease me about it. "You don't need an alarm," he would say. "Your sense of responsibility wakes you up before the sun." Now, there was no teasing voice beside me, just the soft hum of the heater kicking on and the faint creak of the house settling. I lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling. 72, and apparently, according to my son, in possession of something I wasn't entitled to. I got up slowly and slipped on my robe. The hallway carpet felt cool under my feet. When I reached the staircase, I could still see the last of the balloons tied to the railing. One had drifted halfway down overnight, its ribbon trailing like something that had given up. Downstairs, the dining room looked like the aftermath of a performance. Crumbs on the table. Half-melted candle wax hardened against porcelain. A faint red stain where Daniel had set his glass down too hard. I stood there for a long time, not moving. Last year, Thomas sat at the head of that table and insisted on cutting my cake himself. He sang off-key. He always did. Daniel had laughed then, too. But it was different laughter. Warm. Familiar. Not sharp. Grief changes people. But it doesn't invent things that weren't already there. I began clearing plates one by one. The sound of china stacking echoed more loudly than it should have. The house used to feel full in the mornings. Coffee brewing. Thomas reading the paper. Daniel running down the stairs when he still lived here, late for school, grabbing toast on his way out. Now, the only sound was the faucet running. When I opened the dishwasher, I noticed something small. Melissa had rearranged the place, cards from the night before. Mine had been moved slightly to the side, not centered at the head of the table. A small thing, but small things tell the truth when big words try to hide it. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in Thomas's chair. Not mine, his. The leather was still worn in the shape of his shoulders. I wrapped both hands around the mug and let the steam rise against my face. Daniel's words replayed in my mind. The house is too big. The money's just sitting there. You don't need all of it. Need. As if this was about necessity. Thomas and I didn't build this life because we needed square footage. We built it because we believed in roots. Stability. Something to pass down, not just money, but security. I took a slow sip. For the past few months, there had been little comments. Subtle ones. Have you thought about downsizing? Maybe a retirement community would be easier. You don't want to rattle around in here alone. Rattle around, as if I were furniture. At first, I told myself they were worried. That Daniel was grieving in his own clumsy way. That Melissa was trying to be practical. But last night wasn't clumsy. It was deliberate. There's a difference between concern and positioning. I stood and walked into Thomas's study. I didn't open the drawer this time. I simply looked around. The bookshelf. The framed photo of the three of us at the Grand Canyon when Daniel was 12. The plaque from a year Thomas paid off the mortgage early. We had worked too hard for this to be reduced to a punchline over Cabernet. I ran my fingers along the edge of the desk. Daniel thinks I'm holding on. Maybe he's right. But I'm not holding on to money. I'm holding on to what it represents. Partnership, sacrifice, promise. And something else became clear as the morning light filled the room. They weren't asking me to simplify for my comfort. They were asking me to shrink for theirs. And I've spent too many decades expanding my family's life to begin shrinking now. I walked back into the dining room and untied the last balloon from the railing. Then I opened the windows. Fresh air moved through the house, quiet and steady. For the first time since Thomas passed, I didn't feel fragile. I felt alert. Because when people stop pretending, that's when you finally see the shape of things. And I was beginning to see very clearly. By the third day after my birthday, the house had returned to its usual rhythm. Quiet mornings. Afternoon light stretching across the hardwood floors. The clock in the hallway chiming every hour as if nothing had shifted. But something had. Once you see a crack in glass, you can't unsee it. Daniel came by that Thursday evening. He didn't call first. He used his key. That, in itself, used to make me happy. It meant he felt at home here, that this was still his place. This time, I heard the door open and close and felt something else. "Mom," he called out casually. "I'm in the kitchen." I answered. I was slicing apples for a pie I didn't really need to make. Old habits. When things feel unstable, I cook. It gives my hands something steady to do. Daniel walked in, jacket still on, phone in his hand. "Hey," he said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "Quick." "Distracted." "You should call before coming," I said gently. He smiled. "I've always just walked in." "Yes, you have. But not everything stays the same." He sat at the counter and watched me for a moment. "So," he began, tapping his fingers against the granite, "I've been thinking about what I said the other night." I didn't stop slicing. "Have you?" "Yeah. I mean, maybe it came out wrong. Maybe." He cleared his throat. "It's just that Melissa and I have been looking at houses. Something bigger. Closer to her parents. The market's tight right now. You know that." I placed the knife down carefully. And it would really help if we knew what your plans were. With this place. With Dad's accounts. There was not grief. Not concern. Planning. "I wasn't aware my plans required a timeline that aligned with your mortgage," I said evenly. He sighed. "Mom, don't make it sound like that. I'm just trying to be practical." Practical. I remember another conversation about 6 months before Thomas passed. Daniel had been standing in this same kitchen. "Dad ever talk to you about updating the will?" he'd ask casually. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Then there was the afternoon Melissa offered to help organize paperwork. She had lingered a little too long near Thomas's study, asked specific questions about account numbers, insurance beneficiaries. At the time, I told myself they were being responsible. Now, those moments felt different. Connected. "I have plans," I said quietly. Daniel leaned forward. "Good. That's good. Because we just don't want things to get complicated later." Complicated for whom? I studied his face. The boy who used to beg for one more bedtime story. The teenager who once promised he'd build me a house next door when he grew up. When did that softness turn into calculation? "Your father trusted me," I said. Daniel shifted. "Of course he did. He trusted me to handle what we built." "I'm not saying you can't," he replied quickly. "I just think it's time to think ahead." I nodded slowly. "Oh, I am thinking ahead." He seemed satisfied with that answer. Too satisfied. Before leaving, he walked down the hallway toward Thomas's study. Just grabbing something, he called out. I followed. He stood inside the doorway, glancing at the desk. "You should really consider consolidating accounts," he said. "Less to manage." "I manage just fine." He hesitated, then gave me a tight smile. "Okay, just trying to help." After he left, I stood in that doorway alone. There had been other small things, too. A new app he suggested I download to track expenses. A conversation Melissa had about liquid assets. The time Daniel joked that probate can get messy. Small pieces. But together, they formed a shape. This wasn't about my comfort. It wasn't about loneliness. It was about access. And access begins with softening the ground. They weren't pushing yet. They were preparing. That night, I locked the front door myself. And for the first time in 37 years, I turned the key twice. That night, after I locked the door and turned the key twice, I didn't go to bed right away. Instead, I walked back into Thomas's study. The room still smelled faintly of his cologne, cedarwood and something warm. I had avoided changing anything in here since he passed. His leather chair angled slightly toward the window. His reading lamp tilted just the way he liked it. A yellow legal pad still resting on the desk with half-finished notes about property taxes. 37 years of partnership does not disappear in 3 months. I sat down slowly in his chair. For the first time since Daniel's toast, I allowed myself to remember clearly. Not the hospital room, not the machines, but the ordinary evenings. Thomas reviewing account statements. Me paying bills at the kitchen table. We did everything together. One winter night, years ago, when Daniel was in college and money was tight again, I remember telling Thomas we should sell the house. It felt too big then, too expensive. He looked at me and said, "This house isn't just square footage. It's stability. One day when I'm gone, no one gets to push you out of it." I didn't take those words seriously at the time. We were in our 50s. When I'm gone sounded distant. Hypothetical. Now it felt like instruction. I opened the right drawer of his desk. Inside were copies of the trust documents, neatly clipped. Thomas believed in paperwork. If it's written down, he used to say, no one can twist it. I didn't read every page that night. I didn't need to. I remember the meeting with our attorney 5 years ago. We had updated everything after Daniel got married. Thomas had been firm about certain clauses. I remember the lawyer glancing at him, slightly surprised. "You want to make that explicit?" the attorney had asked. "Yes," Thomas replied calmly. "Very." At the time, I assumed he was being cautious. Now I wondered if he had seen something I hadn't. I closed the folder and leaned back. Daniel thinks I'm holding on. He thinks this is about money sitting in accounts. But what he doesn't understand is that Thomas and I built protections, not just savings. We built structure, intention, boundaries. The house isn't a trust. The accounts are structured carefully. And there are conditions. I stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the street was quiet. Porch lights glowing. Lawns trimmed. Neighbors living their steady lives. This house was not an accident. It was the result of decades of restraint. Of saying no to vacations so we could say yes to tuition. Of refinancing when interest rates dropped. Of Thomas working weekends while Daniel played Little League. And now my son talks about it as if it's excess. Too big. Just sitting there, I ran my hand along the edge of the desk. I thought about the small comments again. The timing. The sudden urgency. The way Daniel had stood in this doorway earlier that week. Eyes scanning the room. He wasn't just visiting. He was measuring. 3 months ago, when Thomas passed, Daniel cried in my arms. He said, "I'll take care of you now, Mom." I believed him. But taking care of someone does not mean repositioning them. It does not mean rushing them towards smaller spaces so you can expand into larger ones. I turned off the study lamp and walked back into the hallway. Before heading upstairs, I paused at the dining room. The table looked normal again. Centered. Balanced. I understood something clearly then. Thomas didn't leave me vulnerable. He left me prepared. And if Daniel wants to talk about planning ahead, then perhaps it's time I start doing exactly that. On my terms. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and for the first time since my birthday, I slept without replaying the toast in my head. Because now I wasn't just hurt. I was thinking. 2 days after I sat in Thomas's study and reread nothing, but understood everything, Melissa called. Not Daniel. "Melissa." "Hi, Mom," she said brightly. Too brightly. I was thinking, maybe I could stop by this afternoon. I found a few listings I'd love your opinion on. Listings? Listings for what? I asked, though I already knew. Oh, just some beautiful townhomes in a 55-plus community. They're really charming. Smaller. Easier to maintain. You wouldn't have to worry about stairs. There was again. Stairs. As if gravity had suddenly become my enemy. That's thoughtful. I replied evenly. But I'm not shopping. There was a pause on the other end. Well, of course not right away, she corrected smoothly. Just exploring options. It's always good to be proactive. Proactive. I agreed to let her come over. At 3 o'clock sharp, her SUV pulled into the driveway. She walked in carrying a folder instead of flowers. Not that I expected flowers. We sat at the dining room table. The same one Daniel had raised his glass at just days before. Melissa spread glossy printouts across the wood. "This one has 1,200 square feet, she said, tapping the page. "Open concept. No yard work. And look, community pool." I folded my hands calmly. "And what would happen to this house?" I asked. She smiled as if I had just asked a practical question. "Well, obviously the market is strong right now. You could sell at a great price. That kind of equity shouldn't just sit. I noticed she didn't say you could invest it. She didn't say you could travel. She didn't say you could enjoy it. She said equity. "Daniel mentioned you were thinking of upgrading," I said. She didn't deny it. "We found something beautiful," she admitted. "But it would require flexibility." Flexibility. In other words, movement from me. I stood and walked into the kitchen. "Coffee," I offered. She hesitated, then nodded. While the machine brewed, I heard the faint click of paper shuffling behind me. When I returned, the glossy brochures had been replaced with something else. A single-type document. "What's this?" I asked. "Oh," she said lightly, "just something Daniel drafted. Nothing official. Just an outline of what downsizing could look like financially." I didn't sit. I read. It wasn't a contract, but it was close enough to intention. Projected sale price of my home. Estimated transfer timeline. Suggested division of funds to streamline estate distribution. Estate distribution. I looked up at her. You put a great deal of thought into this. She met my gaze steadily. We just don't want things to become complicated later. Later. Thomas's voice echoed in my memory. No one gets to push you out. I appreciate the effort, I said calmly, placing the paper back on the table. But I'm not ready to simplify my life into bullet points. Her expression shifted slightly. This isn't about pushing you, she insisted. We're thinking long-term. Daniel feels uncertain. Uncertain about what? His inheritance? His timeline? His expansion? I walked to the window and looked out at the front yard. The oak tree Thomas planted when Daniel was born had grown tall and steady. Its roots deep. I've lived here longer than you've known my son, I said quietly. Nothing about my future requires urgency. Melissa gathered the papers slowly. Of course, she said. We're just trying to help. Help has weight. This felt heavier than help. When she left, she forgot one brochure on the table. A small, neat townhome with beige siding and trimmed hedges. I picked it up and turned it over. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, was a note. Closer to us. Easier for everyone. Everyone. I set it down carefully. They weren't asking. They were preparing. And now I was certain of something. They didn't want me safer. They wanted me smaller. And I had no intention of shrinking. The next week, I stopped explaining myself. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just quietly. Daniel called twice. I let it ring the first time. The second time, I answered. Mom, he began, his voice measured. Melissa said you seem distant. I've been busy, I replied. Busy doing what? Managing my life, I almost said. Instead, I answered thinking. There was a pause. You're not upset about the other night, are you? He asked carefully. Upset, as if humiliation had an expiration date. I'm not upset, I said truthfully. I'm adjusting. Adjusting to what? To clarity. He didn't respond to that. That Friday, I made a small change. I stopped giving Daniel updates. For months after Thomas passed, I had been transparent about everything. I told him when I met with the accountant. I mentioned when the quarterly statements arrived. I even discussed small repairs around the house. It felt natural at the time, like keeping family informed. Now it felt unnecessary. When the bank statement arrived, I placed it directly into Thomas's study drawer instead of leaving it on the kitchen counter. When the property tax notice came, I handled it quietly. When Daniel texted, "Did you ever look into consolidating accounts?" I replied, "Everything is handled. Nothing more." That Sunday, he came by again. This time he knocked. Progress. We sat at the kitchen table. "I feel like you're shutting us out," he said. I poured him coffee. "I'm organizing things." "For what?" "For peace of mind." He leaned back in his chair, studying me as if trying to solve a problem. "Mom, you don't have to do everything alone." "I'm not alone," I said calmly. "I have structure." He frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means your father and I planned carefully." He shifted uncomfortably. "We just want transparency." Transparency. The words sounded clean. Harmless. But transparency can also mean access. "I've always been transparent," I said. "That doesn't mean I surrender control." He exhaled sharply. "Control? No one's trying to control you." Control doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives disguised as concern. "I'm not selling the house," I said quietly. "I didn't say you had to." "You didn't have to." Silence filled the space between us. For the first time, he looked uncertain. When Dad passed, he said slowly, "I thought things would shift." "Shift?" "Yes," I replied. "They did." He rubbed his hands together. "You know this is all going to come to me eventually, right?" There it was. Not grief. Not safety. Eventually. I held his gaze. Eventually is not today. He stood shortly after that. Before leaving, he hesitated in the doorway. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Harder. I thought about the years Thomas and I worked weekends. The nights we calculated interest rates by hand. The sacrifices Daniel never saw. Nothing about that was easy, but we did anyway. After he left, I walked into Thomas's study and opened the drawer again. This time, I pulled out the trust document fully. I didn't skim. I read, line by line. The clauses were clear. Lifetime residency. Protected principal. Conditional distributions. Thomas had not been vague, and neither would I be. That evening, I made an appointment. Not with Daniel. Not with Melissa. with the attorney who helped draft these papers. Because if my son believes this is about timing, then it's time I make sure the timing belongs to me. The attorney's office was 14 miles from my house. I hadn't driven there alone since Thomas passed. The morning of the appointment, I left at 9:10 a.m. sharp. I wore the navy blazer I used to wear to parent-teacher meetings when Daniel was in high school. Structured, calm, appropriate. The sky was clear. Traffic light. I kept both hands steady on the steering wheel. This wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. Mr. Halpern had aged since I last saw him. More gray at the temples. Same careful eyes. Mrs. Whitmore, he said warmly as I stepped into his office. I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances. So am I replied. But I'm glad we're meeting. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. I reviewed your trust briefly before you came in, he said, adjusting his glasses. Is there something specific concerning you? I placed the folder on his desk. My son believes the house is too large for me. He's made several suggestions about selling. Mr. Halpern nodded slowly. You're under no obligation to sell. I'm aware of that, I said. What I want to understand is the structure again. Clearly, he opened the document and turned it toward me. The property is held within the Whitmore Family Trust, he began. You retain full lifetime residency rights. No sale can occur without your written authorization. And the principal accounts? Protected. Distributions are conditional. Conditional how? He looked at me directly. Your husband included language regarding beneficiary conduct. I felt my pulse remain steady. Meaning that any attempt to coerce, intimidate, or pressure the primary trustee could trigger discretionary limitations. Primary trustee. That's me. Yes, he confirmed. I let the silence settle. Thomas hadn't been vague. Hypothetically, I said carefully, if a beneficiary began positioning themselves prematurely, Mr. Halpern folded his hands. Then you would have the authority to restructure distributions within the terms of the trust. Restructure. That word felt solid, grounded. And if I wish to amend future allocations? I asked. You may, provided you are of sound mind and acting voluntarily. I almost smiled. I assure you, I am very much of sound mind. He returned the smile politely. We reviewed the documents for nearly an hour. Not emotionally, not defensively, fact by fact, clause by clause. Thomas had added something I had nearly forgotten about. A clause encouraging respect, not legally poetic, but firm. Your husband was very clear, Mr. Halpern said gently. He wanted you protected from impatience. Impatience. That was a softer word than I would have chosen, but it fit. When the meeting ended, I didn't feel angry. I felt anchored. On the drive home, I passed the exit Daniel had mentioned once, near the new development with oversized homes and manicured lawns. The kind of place that requires a significant down payment. I wondered if he had already walked through one. Measured rooms. Imagined furniture. Imagined expansion. When I pulled into my driveway, the house stood exactly as it had for decades. Solid. Unmoved. I sat in the car for a moment before turning off the engine. Daniel believes this is about inheritance timing. Melissa believes it's about efficiency. They both believe I will eventually bend toward convenience. But what they don't understand is this. I am not the temporary holder of this life. I am the steward, and stewardship requires discernment. That afternoon, I removed Daniel's spare key from the drawer by the entryway. Not as punishment, as precaution. Then I placed it inside Thomas's desk. Locked. For the first time since my birthday dinner, I didn't feel reactive. I felt prepared. Because when pressure reveals itself, structure answers it. And I had structure. Now I also had clarity. The house felt different after I removed Daniel's spare key. Not emptier. Safer. There's a quiet power in small decisions. No announcement. No confrontation. Just alignment. 3 days after my meeting with Mr. Halpern, Daniel called again. Mom, we're coming by Sunday, he said. Not a question. For what purpose? I asked evenly. He hesitated. We just want to talk. Clear the air. Clear the air. Air only needs clearing when something has been stirred. Sunday at 2. I replied. I spent Saturday morning in Thomas's study again. Not out of anxiety. Out of order. I made copies of the trust summary Mr. Halpern had prepared. Not the full document. Just the portions relevant to authority and distribution structure. Lifetime residency. Trustee control. Conditional disbursement language. Clear. Concise. Not emotional. Sunday arrived with soft afternoon light. I brewed coffee before they got there. Not as hospitality. As routine. Daniel rang the bell. Progress. Melissa stood beside him, composed as always. No folder this time. No brochures. We sat at the dining room table. The same table. I think things have gotten tense, Daniel began. That's not what Dad would have wanted. Thomas's name used as leverage. I agree, I said calmly. He preferred clarity. Melissa folded her hands. We just feel like there's distance. We don't want misunderstandings. Misunderstandings imply confusion. I reached beside me and placed the trust summary on the table. There is no misunderstanding, I said. Daniel's eyes dropped to the paper. What's this? Structure. He scanned the first page quickly. Mom, why are we looking at legal documents? Because you've been speaking as if my decisions are pending your timeline. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. Fairness, I replied, requires information. Melissa leaned slightly forward. We're not trying to take anything. I know, I said. That caught them off guard. You know, Daniel asked. Yes. You're not taking. You're anticipating. Silence. I tapped the paper gently. This house cannot be sold without my written authorization. Daniel nodded stiffly. I never said it had to be. The accounts are structured. Distributions are conditional. Melissa exchanged a quick glance with him. Conditional, she repeated. Yes. Daniel leaned back in his chair. So that's it? You don't trust us? Trust. I considered that word carefully. Trust does not remove boundaries, I said quietly. Your father and I created this trust to ensure stability, not speed. He exhaled sharply. You're acting like we're circling. I held his gaze. You are. His expression shifted. Not anger. Recognition. Melissa spoke more softly this time. We just thought, after Dad, yes. I interrupted gently. After your father, everything feels unsteady. But unsteady does not mean available. The room was very still. I folded my hands. You both have your lives. Your plans. Your growth. I support that. Daniel swallowed. But this, I continued, lightly resting my hand on the table, is mine to steward, not transfer. No one raised their voice. No one cried. But something recalibrated in that room. Daniel looked down at the paper again. So what happens now? He asked quietly. Now, I said, nothing changes. Melissa inhaled slowly. And later, I replied evenly, will reflect behavior. The words were not a threat. They were structure. After a moment, Daniel nodded once. For the first time since my birthday dinner, he did not argue. When they left, I did not feel victorious. I felt aligned. Clarity does not damage relationships. It reveals them. And now, everything was visible. The house remained. The trust remained. And so did I. After that Sunday conversation, the house settled into a new kind of quiet. Not tense. Defined. Daniel didn't call for 3 days. That in itself told me more than words ever could. On Wednesday evening, my phone buzzed with a text. Can we grab dinner tomorrow? Just you and me. Just you and me. For a moment, I saw him at 8 years old, tugging at my sleeve outside his elementary school, asking if we could get milkshakes before going home. He used to want me to himself. Tomorrow at 6, I replied. We met at a small Italian restaurant about 10 minutes from my house. Neutral territory, soft lighting, white tablecloths, the kind of place where voices stay low. Daniel stood when I approached the table. That was new. Hi, Mom, he said, pulling out my chair. Daniel, we ordered without much discussion. He didn't reach for wine. That was also new. For a few minutes, we talked about ordinary things. The girls' soccer season, a new project at his office, weather, safe topics. Then he folded his hands on the table. I've been thinking about what you said. About structure? I asked calmly. About behavior. There was again. Clear. I don't want you to think I'm circling, he said. I don't think, I replied gently. I observe. He exhaled. I guess after Dad died, everything felt different. I kept thinking about responsibility. About stepping in. Stepping in, I repeated. Yeah, like I'm supposed to take care of things now. I studied his face. When your father was alive, I said quietly, did you ever feel excluded? No, he admitted. Then why assume I'm incapable simply because he is gone? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That's not what I meant. It's how it feels. The waiter set down our plates. We both paused. After a moment, Daniel spoke again. Melissa and I are under pressure, he said. The house we're looking at, it's competitive. And I guess I just started calculating. Calculating. Finally. I know you did, I said. He looked surprised. You do? Yes. I took a slow sip of water. There is nothing wrong with ambition. There is something wrong with assuming someone else's timeline must accelerate to fund it. His shoulders lowered slightly. I didn't mean to make you feel like an obstacle, but you did. He nodded. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I don't want money to be the thing between us, he said quietly. It isn't, I replied. It's expectation. He frowned slightly. What do you mean? You expect movement. I expect respect. The difference sat plainly between us. Daniel looked down at his plate. So what happens now? He asked. The same question he had asked at the dining room table. Now, I said evenly, you build your life the way your father and I built ours. He met my eyes. Without shortcuts. Without dependency. He leaned back, absorbing that. I guess I thought inheritance was part of planning, he admitted. Inheritance, I said gently, is not a tool. It is a result. The check arrived before either of us asked for it. Daniel reached for it automatically. I let him. Outside the restaurant, the air was cool. He hugged me before we parted. Not hurried. Not distracted. Just steady. Drive safe, he said. I always do. As I pulled into my driveway later that evening, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something more stable. Pressure reveals motive. Clarity reveals character. Daniel had shown both. And for the first time since that birthday toast, I saw not just impatience, but the possibility of correction. Structure had done its job. Now, behavior would decide the rest. The week after dinner with Daniel felt measured. Not warm. Not cold. Measured. He didn't mention houses again. He didn't ask about accounts. He texted once to ask if I needed help replacing the porch light. I replied, already handled. And it was. But pressure doesn't disappear overnight. It shifts. Form. That Saturday afternoon, Melissa called. Hi, Mom, she said carefully. Daniel told me you two had dinner. We did. I'm glad, she replied. He's been reflective. Reflective. That's good, I said evenly. There was a pause. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, she continued. About expectations. Expectations again. What page are you referring to? I asked calmly. Well, she said, lowering her voice slightly. We've paused our offer on the new house. For now. But we need clarity long-term. Long-term clarity. We have clarity, I replied. You may not like the timeline, but it is clear. Another pause. I don't want this to turn into tension, she said. We're family. Family. I had learned something recently about that word. Family can be loving. Family can also be strategic. I don't intend for there to be tension, I answered. But there will be boundaries. Her tone sharpened slightly. Are we being punished? Punished. No, I said. You're being informed. She exhaled. We just feel like everything changed after that dinner. Everything had changed before that dinner. The toast simply revealed it. Daniel told me about the trust conditions, she added. I let that settle. Yes, I said. He needed to understand structure. You're not planning to alter anything, are you? She asked quickly. There it was. Not reconciliation. Protection. Why would I? I asked gently. She hesitated. I don't want one bad joke to affect everything. One bad joke. It wasn't the joke, I replied calmly. It was the posture behind it. Silence. Melissa's voice softened again. We've worked hard too. I know, I said. But we can't do everything alone. There was again. Expectation. I didn't build my life assuming someone else would finish it for me. I said evenly. You shouldn't either. She didn't respond immediately. Finally, she said, Daniel feels like you don't trust him. Trust. Trust grows from behavior, I said. Not proximity to inheritance. Another long silence. I don't want us to drift, she said quietly. Then don't circle, I replied. The call ended politely. But I understood something clearly after I hung up. Dinner had been Daniel recalibrating emotionally. This call was Melissa recalibrating strategically. Later that evening, Daniel stopped by briefly. He stood in the foyer, hands in his jacket pockets. "Melissa talked to you," he said. "She did." He looked uneasy. "She's worried. You're going to change things." "I already have," I replied calmly. His eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean?" "I changed access." He glanced toward the key bowl near the door. "You took the spare key." "Yes." He swallowed. "That feels extreme." "No," I said gently. "It feels appropriate." He nodded slowly. "I don't want this to turn into something permanent." "It won't," I said, "unless behavior makes it so." He studied my face carefully. For the first time, I saw something different in his expression. Not entitlement. Not impatience. Awareness. "I messed up," he admitted quietly. "Yes," I said. And what?" he asked. "And what do you plan to do differently?" He didn't answer immediately, but he didn't deflect either. That was new. After he left, I walked into Thomas's study again. I didn't open any drawers. I simply stood there. Structure had been clarified. Behavior had been confronted. Now came the real test. Respect isn't declared. It's demonstrated. And for the first time since that birthday toast, I felt less like an obstacle and more like the standard. And standards do not shrink. They remain until others rise to meet them. The following week, Daniel did something unexpected. He showed up without asking for anything. No mention of houses. No questions about accounts. No subtle references to timing. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon carrying a small toolbox. "I noticed the gate was sticking," he said. "Thought I'd fix it." I stepped aside and let him into the backyard. He worked quietly. No commentori. No positioning. Just tightening hinges, adjusting alignment, sanding the edge where the wood had swollen from rain. I watched from the kitchen window. There's a difference between stepping in to take over and stepping in to contribute. This felt like the second. When he came back inside, he wiped his hands on a cloth and looked around. "Feels different in here," he said. "It is," I replied. He nodded. "I've been thinking about something you said." "About behavior?" I asked. "About standards." He leaned against the counter. I realized I started treating this place like it was already mine. I didn't interrupt. "And I started treating you like a bridge to it," he continued. "That kind of honesty is uncomfortable, but it's clean." "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. He ran a hand through his hair. "Dad would have called me out." "Yes," I said softly. "He would have." Silence settled between us, but it wasn't strained. "I don't want you to feel like I'm waiting," he said. "Then don't wait," I replied. "Build." He nodded slowly. "We withdrew our offer on the house." "That's your decision," I said evenly. "We need to do it ourselves," he admitted, without assuming anything. That was the first time he said it clearly. Without assuming anything. I poured us both a glass of iced tea. "Daniel," I said gently, "inheritance is not a retirement plan for the young. It's a continuation of stewardship." He absorbed that. "I thought I was being responsible," he said. "You were being anticipatory," I corrected calmly. He gave a small, self-aware smile. "Yeah." For a moment, I saw the boy again. The one who used to sit at this counter doing homework while I cooked dinner. The one who once said he'd take care of me when I got old. "I don't need taking care of," I said quietly. "I need respect." "You have it," he answered. "Respect isn't something you declare once. It's something you prove consistently." That evening, he stayed for dinner. Not because he needed something, because he wanted to be there. We ate simply. Roast chicken, green beans, nothing ceremonial. No wine, no toasts. After he left, I walked into Thomas's study one more time. I opened the trust folder and reviewed the amendment page Mr. Halpern had prepared during our meeting. It sat and signed. I didn't rush to alter anything. Structure is not revenge. It's protection. And protection works best when it doesn't need to be used. I placed the amendment draft back into the folder, closed the drawer, locked it. Then I walked back into the living room and turned off the lights. I realized something important. The power in this situation was never about withholding money. It was about defining terms. And once the terms were clear, everything shifted. Daniel wasn't an enemy. He was a son who had stepped too far forward. And now he had stepped back. That matters. Because when standards are held calmly, people either leave or they rise. For the first time since my 72nd birthday, I didn't feel like an obstacle in my own home. I felt like its anchor. and anchors do not move just because someone wants the tide to hurry. A month after my 72nd birthday, Daniel came over again. Not to talk about houses, not to talk about accounts, just to bring over a pie Melissa had baked. He stood at the door holding it carefully, like it mattered. For dessert, he said, no speeches. I almost smiled at that. No speeches, I agreed. We sat at the dining room table, the same table where he had once raised his glass and called me the old lady who wouldn't let go. The chandelier light was softer that evening. No guests, no tension in the air, just 3 plates, 3 forks, and the quiet hum of the house that had held every version of our family. Daniel looked around the room slowly. I didn't realize how much of Dad is still here, he said. He built most of it, I replied, and you kept it standing. I didn't answer right away, because that was the part he hadn't understood before. A house is wood and nails. A life is maintenance. After dinner, he helped me clear the table without being asked. He carried plates to the sink. He wiped the counter. Small things. But small things tell the truth. When he finished, he stood near the hallway that leads to Thomas's study. I haven't gone in there since, he began. You can't, I said. He walked inside slowly. I stayed in the doorway. He picked up his father's old reading glasses and turned them over in his hands. I thought stepping in meant taking control, he said quietly. It doesn't, I replied. It means standing beside. He nodded. I was scared, he admitted. After Dad died, everything felt temporary. Like if I didn't grab hold of something, it would disappear. I understood that. Grief makes people reach. Sometimes too quickly. But grabbing isn't the same as building, I said. No, he agreed. It's not. He placed the glasses back exactly where they had been. I'm sorry, he said then. Not defensive. Not strategic. Just clear. I know, I answered. Forgiveness isn't loud. It's a quiet recalibration. We walked back into the living room and sat for a while without speaking. The grandfather clock chimed 8. Daniel glanced at me. You're not going anywhere, are you? I met his eyes. Not unless I decide to. He smiled slightly. Good. Before he left, he paused at the door. I don't want to inherit this house. He said, I want to earn whatever comes next. That was the moment I knew something had truly shifted. After he drove away, I walked through the house slowly. The kitchen, the dining room, the hallway where balloons had once drooped after that birthday dinner. Everything felt steady. I went into Thomas's study one last time that night and opened the drawer. The amendment page was still there, unsigned. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I placed it back exactly where it belonged and closed the drawer. Structure had done its work. Boundaries had been drawn. Behavior had responded. I turned off the lamp and stood in the doorway. 72 years old. A widow. A mother. Not an obstacle. Not a bridge. Not a placeholder. I am the steward of this life Thomas and I built. And stewardship doesn't mean holding on out of fear. It means holding steady out of principle. That birthday, toast could have reduced me to something smaller. Instead, it revealed what needed to be strengthened. My son thought I wouldn't let go of his father's money. What he didn't understand was this. I wasn't holding on to money. I was holding on to dignity. And dignity, once defined, does not require a raised glass to defend it. It simply stands. And so do I.